Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're getting into the fourth episode of Telltale Games The Walking Dead Season 3. In case you missed any of the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Season 3, Episode 4 of Telltale Games The Walking Dead is called Thicker Than Water, and as the tradition of the season dictates, we get a glimpse into the past as the episode opens. This particular flashback involves Javier and David hanging out at a batting cage in a park, with sounds of children laughing and people enjoying a day out ringing all around. There's a level of animosity between the two, with David clearly upset about something he doesn't seem to want to talk too much about. The conversation is interrupted by a kid who seems really desperate for an autograph from Javier, and I can't help but think about how difficult it would be for him to handle that kind of attention when he's just trying to spend time with his brother. I was never one for celebrity worship, though I can understand the allure of wanting someone you look up to sign something or acknowledge your presence. That being said, I have Javi turn down the kid out of spite for the interruption. As the conversation progresses, they eventually exit the batting cage, and we learn that David isn't happy being home with Kate and the kids. He misses his time in the military, and he wants to go back to active duty. He sees himself as a soldier and not really much else, and he's convinced that going back to that life would be better for everyone. And this is the first glimpse we get into David's real personality. He sees himself as a protector, a warrior, and he feels like he's failed in everything he's tried to do outside of that. He and Kate fight constantly, and he doesn't really connect with Gabe or Mariana. We also know from prior episodes that he feels like his parents, especially his father, see Javier as the favorite, and he thinks he's a failure as a son because Javi gets the attention despite not being around as much for the family. David gets a lot of hate overall, but honestly, he's not as bad as he's made out to be. He takes a really bad turn at the end of the final episode, and that's something we'll cover more in depth when we get there. But he does really care for Javier, Kate, and the kids. I'll stand by what I said in episode 3 by pointing out that he is far from perfect, but no one is perfect, and we really need to acknowledge that fact if we're going to keep looking at these characters. Moving back into the modern day in Richmond, Javier and David are shoved into the city jail following the events from the end of episode 3. Clint is riding hard on Joan's bandwagon as he argues with the pair that she just wants them to cooperate and obey the laws. But that's not really an option anymore, as she seems to be operating above any laws that she might be trying to enforce. Once Clint leaves, the brothers spend a few minutes talking about the situation, and it's clear that David is worried about Kate and making sure her and Gabe are safe above all else. This is the warrior mentality kicking in, the drive to fight for something, and he seems dead set on getting them all out of Richmond. I don't often talk too much about the choices in the individual conversations, but I do want to point out something here, because I think one of the biggest problems I've seen when people are debating whether any character in the series warrants hate or love is a lack of empathy when deciding what to say to various characters. For instance, a lot of the people who hate Kenny or Jane from Season 2 focus on the reactions they got when picking the worst possible dialogue choices, and how those choices mounted over the course of the season to create their chosen monster in the end. The same is true here for David. If you select choices based on your dislike of him because you think he treated Kate poorly in the scene with the broken glass, instead of coming at the dialogue choices from Javier's perspective as a brother from a genuinely tight family, you're going to wind up with a really bad relationship between Javier and David. The ultimate outcome might not be that much different, but the attitude and the way the story plays out is very different. And this is where I want to say that while I can point out all day long how poor many of the writing decisions in Season 2 and 3 are at times, there's a depth to these characters and seasons that you only get if you actually use empathy and try to put yourself in the shoes of the characters you're playing as. If you only play the game from your own perspective, You're going to have your own experience based on your own life experiences, and you aren't going to learn anything new from the chance to step into someone else's shoes. Javier is a caring individual from everything we've seen, and he loves his family, including his brother, despite the fights they may have. He wouldn't be giving David extra hate and pushing him as far as some of the dialogue options might suggest. And David feels the same way toward him. Both of them have their faults, but they're only human, and they do love each other. Joan shows up as the brothers finish their talk, saying she's arranged a meeting in the public square for the following morning and making it clear that her manipulation knows no bounds. Even as she is speaking, she's trying to justify her actions as keeping the people safe, and she is confident that she can twist her words in just the right way to make the community back her up. And this illustrates why critical thinking is so important. If the community was presented with the plain facts, and everyone was logically minded, it would be extremely clear how horrible Joan's actions were. She ordered the slaughter of innocent people in other communities and took supplies with no regard for the well-being of anyone but herself. But we know how these things usually go. The charismatic leader makes sure no dissenting voices can be heard before spinning their own narrative to the group in a way that will appeal to their fears and needs. Her plan is to do the same thing she did with Clint and Dr. Lingard, telling them about how the raids were necessary and making them seem like the best means to the end of having Richmond become a self-sustaining beacon. But we're getting ahead of ourselves as Joan winds up taking David to, quote-unquote, ask him some questions, and Javi is left looking for a way out of the cell. He gets out with some help from Gabe before making his way to Eleanor's apartment, where Kate and everyone else are holed up. The scene in the apartment is rather rushed, and to be honest, it's really some of the worst writing in the season, as they realize the situation in Richmond isn't great and decide the best course of action is to get some guns. The conversation just feels really out of place, and the only real information we get is that the herd of zombies at the wall is growing, and Kate still wants to leave without David. Javier, Gabe, and Ava make a trip to the city armory and manage to secure some guns, though it isn't without incident, as Javier is stabbed by a guard as they are leaving. That stab wound forces the group to head to the medical facility in search of some help from Dr. Lingard, but he proves to be less than helpful as Javier finds him passed out with Clementine raiding the room. Ignoring Lingard's drug problem for just a moment, Clementine offers to help stitch Javier up. As Clementine stitches up Javi's arm, we get a flashback to Ava bringing supplies to Clem after she's been kicked out for giving medicine to AJ. The scene speaks to Ava's character and tells us a little about who she really is, but it also shows a little bit about who David is, as Clem finds a drawing in the bag of supplies, and Ava mentions AJ drew it after Clem left and that David wanted her to have it. This implies that David was involved in sending the supplies to Clem with Ava's help, something he likely did despite no one else knowing he was involved, as Ava says that she needs to get back before anyone notices she was gone. Back in the hospital room, Clem finishes up on Javi's arm, and Dr. Lingard wakes up just in time to hint at Joan's possible plans for David and to offer AJ's location in exchange for a favor. Lingard fills a syringe up and asks them to inject it in his arm and kill him. He says he doesn't want to live with the way that things have become, and without David around, he's giving up on the world as a whole. Now, while it may be tempting to accept, especially as Clementine is pleading for Javier to do it so she can find AJ, there is no world in which that action could be considered moral. First of all, Lingard is clearly not in his right mind. His eyes are glazed over and red, and he isn't in a fit state to be making any decisions, let alone decisions about his own life. Secondly, asking someone else to do something like that just isn't right. It would be one thing if he was suffering from some terminal injury or disease and was just wanting to go out on his own terms, but he's just given up hope because of the drugs and Joan, and he needs time to sober up and recover. If David can be saved, and the community can be wrestled away from Joan, they'll need Lingard and his medical expertise moving forward. Clementine isn't really happy about the decision, but the reality is that she's blinded by her emotions and her desperate search for AJ. She needs to be shown that there is another way, and Javier is the perfect role model for that. Getting back to the apartment, we see Gabe trying to impress Clementine with the gift of a gun, and the group plans the next step in their plan to fix Richmond. While they are planning, though, we are treated to another example of just awful writing and a very incorrect prompt, as Javi was supposed to explain to Kate how he got himself stabbed, but instead blames Gabe. It's honestly really frustrating to click on a prompt expecting one thing and being blindsided by a completely different line. But there isn't a whole lot that can be done, as Gabe gets angry about the tone that Javi took, as well as the fact that everyone in the room seems to object to him helping to free his dad. Then, things go really off the rails as Gabe brings up Javi shooting Conrad, causing Tripp and Eleanor to turn on Javier and throw any semblance of reason out the window. I don't want to keep pointing at the writing, but this is just another moment where I just absolutely wanted to stand up and walk away from the game for a bit. It is manufactured drama, and just comes across as if the writers were all working on their first script and needed something to throw in to extend the episode length. There was absolutely no reason Conrad needed to die. The whole exchange with him and Clementine could have easily happened with the involvement of the group, and Javier could have been the deciding vote on whether to keep her with them to use as leverage or to let her go. In that scenario, it would have been easy to justify keeping her, and even easier to argue that not doing so was somehow built on our own prior experiences with her, like the writers seem to be going for. But they chose instead to write the situation we got. And I'll be clear, I kind of liked Conrad, and I would have preferred to keep him around if he hadn't pointed a gun at Gabe. The fact that this one situation and Javier making the choice to put Gabe over Conrad is in such a stupid scene is now coming back with Tripp and Eleanor acting like Javier is the worst person in the world is just some of the worst writing in the series hands down. With that out of my system, we'll move along to Javi, Gabe, Clementine, Kate, and Ava going to get a truck that Ava says will help them escape through the herd of walkers. I'll be honest, there isn't much to talk about when it comes to getting the actual vehicle, aside from hints at a budding romance between Gabe and Clementine. They get away just as a couple of guards show up, and wind up spending some time talking as they wait for Ava to call on the radio and let them know it's time to crash Joan's party. The conversation builds up, with Kate and Javier talking about the overall situation, but also taking a breather. These little moments are really good and give us a chance to understand the characters a bit more. I really wish we had more conversations like this. They talk a bit about how Clementine and Gabe seem to be crushing on each other, and how it's not fair that they won't get to experience dating like it used to be, with the world being what it is. And they share their own feelings for each other. Now, it could be argued that Kate and David are married, but let's be real. Javier and Kate have spent the past 4 years together going through the fields of hell, all while thinking that David was long dead. Even without the problems they had been having in their relationship, Kate makes it clear that she has strong feelings for Javier and no longer has those feelings for David. There really is no conflict here, and the pair of them seem to make a great couple, so why not go for it? Just put a bookmark there though, as Ava comes over the radio and alerts them to the fact that Joan is hosting an execution rather than a trial. In hindsight, this should have been pretty obvious given what Dr. Lingard told Javi, but we'll chalk that up to Javier just being incredibly dense. Javi, Clem, and Gabe all head to the square, with Kate staying behind to keep the truck running. As they arrive, they find Joan acting like a typical politician as she stands on the stage next to David, who is standing on a stool with a noose around his neck. David calls out Joan for her lies, but she has an apparent ace in the hole as she reveals the zombified remains of Badger. And that apparently works, as the stunned crowd hangs on her every word, believing with no evidence whatsoever that David, who most, if not all of them would have known, killed one of his deputies. Now, we have no way of knowing what the community thought of David as a whole, so I suppose we'll just assume that he was not liked and leave it at that. The cherry on top of this whole thing is that Eleanor apparently ratted out the plan that Javi and the others had come up with to Joan, telling her that Javi wanted to save David. Now, that's supposed to be some kind of revelation, but it winds up just being a bridge to Joan trotting out Tripp and Ava, asking Javier to pick one to live. Her plan is as transparent as a pane of glass, though, and she has the person Javier picks to live killed on the spot. Even the first time I played through, I knew what she was doing, but in that instance, I picked Ava because I didn't like David and she was loyal to him. This time, though, I chose Tripp, mainly because I wasn't happy with how he turned on Javier, and I really like Ava's character a lot more. There isn't really a moral choice here, though. There's been times in prior seasons where it was justifiable to save one person over another or let someone die for an explainable reason, but this scene is just so senseless. It feels like the writers were just looking for ways to up the ante and thought that it would be cool to shove another life or death decision just for the sake of having it. But Tripp's death is overshadowed by Joan's craziness, and then again when Clint finally steps up and insists that they should exile the group instead of killing David. Awful nice of him to say something after they'd already committed one atrocity. Javier is presented with the option to shoot Joan or take an offer to leave the community, and I can justify this one as leaving makes the most sense. Take the win, with the only casualty being Tripp, and live to fight another day. Joan's true colors have come out in front of the whole community, and it's only a matter of time before they turn on her, with Clint and Lingard there to pick up the pieces. That would be way too easy though, and the whole plan goes out the window as David uses his freedom to take Clint hostage and cause all hell to break loose. There's gunfire and people being killed left and right as they try to flee before David shoots Clint point blank 3 feet in front of Gabe, covering his son in the man's blood before taking off in search of Joan. There's general chaos and pandemonium, and the episode ends with Kate plowing through clouds of tear gas in the truck and barely missing Javi and Clementine before smashing into one of the external walls. As zombies come pouring through the new opening, the truck starts leaking gas. Fire from a Molotov cocktail ignites the fumes, and as Javi watches in horror, the truck explodes. Things don't seem to be going well for Javi and the group, but there's one episode left and anything could still happen. I know I've been rough on the writing this season, but that's mostly because I really like the overall idea and the story as well as the characters. Javier and Kate, Gabe, Mariana, and the rest of the cast in general all have a lot of potential, and it feels like so much was lost for the sake of trying to up the excitement when that really wasn't needed. The allure of the series in general was always the story, and I think that got set aside at times when it should have been shining. Even so, we've got one episode left before we move on to the final season and finish up Clementine's story. In the meantime, I'm also working on a few other types of videos, stretching into other games and opening up concepts and ideas that I want to expand on as we continue walking down the path of philosophy and ethics. Once Season 4 is complete, we'll be diving into a new game for these weekly breakdowns. The community has been voting on which game will be covered, and we're getting close to the end of voting over on the community tab, so make sure to head over there and make your voice heard. The winning game will be covered from start to finish over the course of however many weeks it takes in a similar fashion to how we've been covering The Walking Dead, and I can't wait to see what you all pick. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well, and let me know what choices you made and what you thought of the episode down in the comments. I've also got channel memberships and a Patreon for those who might be interested, so check those out if you're looking for other ways to support the channel. For now, I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.